Hello, welcome to SobelCo Insights. In this session, we will be discussing single audits. Hi, my name is Brad Muniz. I'm the partner in charge of the assurance practice at SobelCo. With me today is Victoria Keene. Victoria, I've been involved with nonprofit audits for a while, okay? And they were pretty standard audits, and then Yellow Book became real popular, and then all of a sudden this single audit concept came out. What is a single audit?
Yeah, so it also goes by a Uniform Grant Guidance, or we call it UGG because we have to abbreviate everything. But basically, it's just funding that's over $750,000 or more, and it usually comes from the federal or the state government. It's the money that you're spending in that year. So it's a special type of audit that's required, and it requires a lot more different types of testing. And basically, the federal government wants to have assurance that you're spending the money the correct way that they want you to, and that the reason why they gave you the money, and that the controls and the compliance are in place and with the requirements for that particular program. So that's the general answer.
Now, I've seen you and Tyler do a 3-hour presentation on this topic, and I have 5 questions for you that we're going to try and cover in 15 minutes. Yeah. So we're not going to go into the detail you went there, and it was a great presentation, but I mean, I'm looking at the content of what's included and what's required in these, and these are almost akin to an SEC type of audit nowadays. They've gotten exponentially worse harder over the years, it seems.
Yeah, there's a lot of work that goes into it, and depending on what type of program you're looking at, if you have money from the federal government, and if you have money from the state over that $750,000, it's really in essence 2 single audits. So you're looking at 2 different things.
We're going to get to different grants in a little bit, but I mean, how does somebody know if they need one? I mean, is this only nonprofit organizations?
Overall, it's generally nonprofit, but not always. Commercial could have federal funding that requires a single audit. I think the biggest and most important thing is that you're reading these contracts that you should be getting from them and determining whether this requirement falls in the requirement or not. So the key is really to read all the contracts that you have that they're giving you that money for. So I think that's the most important thing if you learn nothing else.
And it's key you're saying that. I mean, we were in an audit planning meeting for a commercial company, and of course I won't give any information, but it was a commercial company, and somebody said that they received a government contract. And I'm not a complete nonprofit guy. I'm like, okay, cool, good for them. But now talking with you, and some people said we should reach out to you, that there's a possibility that this commercial client could require a single, in addition to the regular audit that the bank needs,
right.
Now they potentially need a single audit.
Yeah, definitely.
Looks like you have a new client.
Uh-oh.
Does it matter though where the money's coming from?
Yes. So really, it's ultimately where it stems from. So let's say if the money goes from the federal government and passes to the state of New Jersey and then passes to your organization, it's ultimately federal money. Now, if it just comes straight from the state and then comes to you, then that's state money. Now, when we're looking at that for audit purposes, we're kind of putting it in 2 separate buckets. So federal money versus state money, and that's how we're going to kind of determine if you need a single audit. So let's say, you spend, it's really all about what you spent of that money. So let's say you had $750,000 of federal, you would need a single audit for federal, but you only have, $250,000 of state. You would only need a single audit for federal and not for state. But if the state went over and is $800,000 or $751,000 or $750 even, then you would need one for both of them. So it matters, unfortunately or fortunately.
So they're not 2 separate audits. You're still doing one audit, but there's separate procedures that you have to perform both without getting into the details of it. So the one thing I want to clarify, because we started this whole series and everything during the pandemic, and PPP was pretty much the lead-in.
Yes.
PPP does not fall into this,
correct?
Correct?
It does not.
They kind of exempted that.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Thank goodness. That would have been awful if they didn't. So.
So one of the things I hear, and we'll talk. I'm going to ask you a question later on just about the audits in general, and I'm sure you're going to hit on some of the complexities of it. But one of the things I hear the people here who do a lot of single audits referring to a lot are CFAs, CISAs, and I just think that you guys are trying to like be cool with some words that none of us understand. But what are CISAs?
Yeah. So you'll hear that abbreviation a lot. It's your Schedule of Expenditures of Federal Awards, or CISA state awards. That's basically going to break out everything that you have. So it's a schedule that's usually in your financial statements. It's something that you, as a client, you should be providing to your auditors, but they can help you or assist you in the process. It lists out where the money is coming from, the federal government, state government, the assistant listing number, which used to be the CFD number, which is Catalog of Federal Domestic Assistance. They decided to change that one, so just another abbreviation for you to know. It also tells you how much was awarded, how much was spent, and then, you know, a grant, if there's a grant number, if there's a grant period. That kind of just basically explains everything and lists it all out, sums it all up, and kind of just gives you all the detail that a reader of the financial statements might want to know.
So this CIFA and CISA isn't something that the government's giving you. You have the contract that you have to review to determine if
Yes.
you need that single audit. And then you have your financial statements, which are traditional financial statements, have the audit report, which is not part of the financial statements, but it's an audit report. Balance sheet, I use the commercial jargon.
That's fine.
Balance sheet, income statement, you know, the statement of changes in the net assets, okay, and assets available, statement of cash flows, footnotes, traditional financial statements, right?
Yep.
Then you have this CIFA, this schedule of the awards.
Correct.
And then there's also reporting on internal controls.
Right. Well, yeah, that's a different letter, and we discussed to make sure that you're all in line with the internal controls, and but yeah, so
and real quick, and our audit report actually addresses this report on the internal controls too.
right.
And that's probably, I mean, the schedule of the awards is really big because I know that it's scrutinized, criticized, and reviewed not just internally by external people.
Right.
But the internal control reporting is very significant because that's where some matters come up, and I'm sure that's where governmental agencies look at. And everybody's afraid to get an internal control comment, and it's this is completely an editorial comment on my part. Merritt Branch and I want to do a presentation on internal controls, and you know, don't fear the comments. Most boards want to hear if there are internal control matters because they want to be able to address it. But the controllers never want them because they feel that we're reporting on them then.
Right.
But in reality, it's as important because the government also wants to know. You opened up with saying they want to know that you're spending the money properly and how they said it. And they're looking to that report to see if there are internal control issues.
Yeah.
Are there any major programs and why do they matter?
Right. So your auditors are going to come in and you're going to find out that you need to have a single audit. So what happens is your auditor is going to do a calculation and make your major program determination. And that's where they kind of go through all the programs and determine which ones are going to be like heavily scrutinized and tested. There's a whole process. I could talk 15 minutes just about that, but there's more detail that the programs have to undergo, and basically at the end of the day there's different rules. There needs to be a certain amount of coverage, and basically then at the end of the day you might come out with 2, 3, 4, 5 plus major programs, and those are the programs that your auditors are going to spend the most time looking into. Will they look at the other stuff on your CIFA? Yeah, but those are the ones that they're doing compliance and control testing and making sure that you're in line with what the government wants you to be in line with.
And is it generally based on dollar value, or is there other risk factors that make it considered a major program?
It's a portion of it is. It's mostly dollar amount based off of, there's a portion that's whether it's an A or a B program. And then there's a percentage that you have to get coverage on, which is usually either 20 or 40%. So it's mostly dollar amount, but it can vary.
Because I've listened to Tara and you and Bridget talk about this stuff, and just hearing you say, oh no, these are A's and B's.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, I was a C student. If it's a new program, if they've had issues in the past.
Right.
All of this stuff fits in, and I think that what's important here, and I know we're kind of mixing government concepts with accounting concept and audit concepts, but all of this packages together.
Yeah.
And we go through a peer review, and they beat the heck out of this type of work. More than I see them beating up on, they don't look at SEC stuff, more than I see them beating up on other technical areas sometimes. And then the government has the ability to come in and look at this, and they like to make their own comments too.
Yep.
So this is an area that is really reviewed, and I don't know if it ever becomes a debate. How do the results of the type of audit affect the organization?
Right, so you're kind of briefly talking about the results, the report at the end, and on our report, it's like one of the last pages, and usually when I present it to people, I'm like, okay, let's go to the end of the report and let's see what your results were. The importance of it is obviously the opinion that you're going to get. An unmodified opinion is the best opinion that you can get. Obviously, if you get anything else, then we would be talking differently. And then what happens is, if you have a significant deficiency or material weakness, I know you always talk about this, is funding actually going to be taken away? I mean, more than likely, no, but they are going to look at it, and if it's something that's continuously happening, you could reduce funding, you could get less. So it is really important, it's not something to be overlooked. You can't just ignore the fact that you need to have the single audit, and you want to make sure that you're in line with what they want you to be in line with. If you have a significant deficiency or material weakness, it is noted in the financial statements and it is explained. You get the opportunity to explain, what you did to change it, the circumstances, that might have come because of it. And it's really important to take it seriously.
And that internal control, I know we're going back to it. I didn't mean to surprise you with it before. So that internal control reporting usually says, here are the matters that we found this year. And it also says, here are the matters that we saw last year.
Correct.
Because they're numbered, it was 2021-1.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the other page may have 2020-1, that was last year's finding.
Right.
We have to comment on the status of that then.
Correct.
Everybody wants to see them cleared, hopefully.
Yes.
I mean, you made a very interesting comment about will funding be taken away, and that's what everybody fears. Now, I remember we had a nonprofit that had 12 material weaknesses one year, and that's not anything to be proud of. Their funding was not taken away, okay? But I don't want anybody getting a full sense of security. To your comment, you might be reduced.
Definitely.
I don't want anybody getting a full sense of security. Well, Brad said somebody got 12 and nothing happened. It all depends on the significance, or not only say significance and material, but what is the government viewing too? And we don't know what they consider important,
Right.
And we just have to report it. But it's the aim of the organization also to try and strengthen those controls.
And where the funding comes from. If the state might be a little more lenient to try and help you out. I had another client that had a lot of findings too, and the state was really helpful in helping them move forward and still be able to do the services that they want. So it depends.
One last thing I'll ask you: pass through.
Yeah.
You said before you might get federal money that goes to the state and then comes to you.
Yeah.
Which is that federal or state money?
It's federal. It's where it stems from. So wherever it originally comes from is the money that it is considered.
Okay, so now is it an issue if it goes from the federal to the state, or just the state to ABC nonprofit, but ABC nonprofit gives it to XYZ nonprofit?
Well, then that's a totally different that's a totally different thing. It all depends on if they're considered a subrecipient, who's monitoring things. So it will depend.
And not an easy answer.
No, I'm gonna fault to it depends. And I think that it really does depend on who's controlling where the money comes from and who's monitoring the work.
So the reason why I asked that question is, don't make an assumption.
Yeah.
If you receive money, more than likely nonprofit organizations, a lot of them are getting some sort of government funding in some way. So we know now some commercial companies have gotten government funding. Yep. If you're receiving money, talk with somebody about this. Because you don't want to make the assumption that, oh no, well, I got it from a nonprofit, so it doesn't matter.
Right.
It could matter.
And there's a lot of COVID money too that's coming out, not PPP, but other money that the government's kind of giving out and people are getting and not even realizing that this comes with other requirements that it's not just free money, you know, they have to use it a certain way, they have to do reporting on it. So it's definitely something to look into if something's just dropping in your bank account, you know.
Okay. Well, Victoria, as I said, I've watched you and Tyler do a 3-hour presentation on this topic, so it is a heavy topic and we can only really barely touch the surface in 15 minutes. But I do want to thank you for this information. If anybody has any questions, reach out to Victoria. She's extremely knowledgeable in this area. And I want to thank everybody for watching and look for some of our other episodes. Thank you.